The storm raged outside, lightning cracking through the sky and thunder rumbling so loudly it seemed to shake the walls of Tom's old, isolated house. He sat alone in the living room, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The power was out, and the flickering glow of a single candle was the only source of light. Tom had grown accustomed to solitude since moving to the countryside after his divorce. The quiet had once been comforting, but tonight it felt oppressive. As the storm grew louder, he pulled his blanket tighter around him and tried to focus on the book in his lap. Then he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was faint, barely audible over the storm, but it was distinct enough to send a chill down his spine. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 12 a.m. midnight. Who would be out here at this hour, he muttered to himself. His nearest neighbor was miles away, and no one ever visited him unannounced. He stood hesitantly and approached the door. Rain pelted the windows as the wind howled like a living thing. When he opened the door, there was nothing. The porch was empty, and the darkness beyond it was impenetrable. Tom closed the door, double-checking the lock before returning to the couch. He tried to convince himself it had been the wind or a branch hitting the house. But as soon as he sat down, it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder. His heart pounded as he approached the door again, this time grabbing a flashlight. He opened the door swiftly, shining the light into the stormy night. Nothing. No one. The rain poured in torrents, and the driveway was a river of mud. There were no footprints. Tom's unease grew. He locked the door again and drew the deadbolt. He told himself it was just his imagination, but deep down he knew something wasn't right. Back on the couch, he tried to distract himself by reading, but he couldn't focus. His ears strained for any sound over the storm. Then it started again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it wasn't at the front door. The sound came from the window near the kitchen. Tom froze. The blood drained from his face as he slowly turned toward the kitchen. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Gathering his courage, he grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the kitchen. "Hello?" he called, his voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The only response was the storm's relentless roar. He reached the kitchen window and shone the flashlight outside. The beam of light revealed only the rain-slicked yard and the swaying trees. But just as he was about to turn away, the beam caught something. A shadowy figure standing at the edge of the woods. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, despite the torrential rain. He couldn't make out any features, but he knew it was staring at him. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, motionless. Suddenly, the knocking resumed, but it wasn't coming from the window anymore. It was at the front door again, louder and more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. Tom whipped around, his heart hammering in his chest. How could the figure have moved so quickly? He rushed to the door, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice barely audible over the storm. No answer. He hesitated, then peered through the peephole. There was nothing there, just the empty porch and the rain. But as he pulled away from the peephole, something slammed against the door, rattling it in its frame. Tom stumbled back, his flashlight slipping from his hand and rolling across the floor. "Leave me alone," he shouted, panic overtaking him. The banging stopped. Silence filled the room, save for the storm outside. Tom retrieved his flashlight and backed away from the door, his hands trembling. Suddenly, his phone rang. The sound was so jarring in the silence that he nearly dropped the flashlight again. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table and saw an unknown number on the screen. "Hello?" he answered, his voice shaking. A raspy whisper replied, "Don't look behind you." The line went dead. Tom's blood turned to ice. He spun around, his flashlight casting frantic beams of light across the room. There was no one there. He was breathing heavily now, his mind racing. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he wasn't alone. The knocking started again, but this time it was coming from multiple directions. The front door, the windows, the walls. It was as if the house itself was alive, and it wanted him out. Tom ran to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him and locking it. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the bed and sat in the corner, clutching it tightly. The knocking grew louder, more frenzied, echoing through the house. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was deafening. Tom didn't move, didn't dare breathe. Minutes passed, then an